My name is John William Arnold Sr., and I was about to do this veterans interview with Mr. Joe Douglas Worley. Mr. Worley lives at 804 Hillside Drive, Burleson, Texas. Mr. Worley, when and where were you born?
I was born in 1931, November the 13th, in Whitney, Texas.
That's good. And when did you enter the service?
I had split periods in the service. I went in February 1952 into the U.S. Air Force.
Did you volunteer?
Yes.
Okay.
And I served for 4 years in the Air Force during the Korean War. My brothers had served in World War II, both of them. And I was too young for World War II, but I was just the right age when the Korean War broke out. So I figured that was my war, and I hastened down. Several of us from our hometown went down and enlisted together.
I might add that this interview is sponsored by the Burleson Heritage Foundation, of which I'm a member. All right, then after that service, you went back later?
Yes, sir. I got out of the Air Force and went to college and to seminary. In the Air Force, I was a radio operator, and I served for tour of duty in Korea as a radio operator. Then in 1956, I was discharged from the Air Force. I enrolled in Texas Wesleyan University and got my bachelor's degree, and I went on to seminary at Perkins School of Theology in Dallas and was ordained a Methodist minister. Then in 1962, I went into the U.S. Army as a chaplain.
Good. All right, now, I might ask you this. Did you pick the Army? You decided to do that yourself?
Yes.
That was your decision?
Yes. And basically, the Army was building up at the start of the Vietnam War, and they needed chaplains desperately, so I enlisted or volunteered for the U.S. Army.
Okay. Does a chaplain go to boot camp or
Yes,
anything?
sir.
All
Yes.
right.
I've been to basic training or boot camp twice.
All right.
Once in the Air Force and once in the Army.
And where did you do this?
I did basic training for the Air Force at at Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio. And I did basic training for the chaplaincy at Fort Hamilton, New York.
Well, was it tough?
Oh, yes.
Did you get through it? You got through it all right?
Oh, yeah, I enjoyed it. I had volunteered, so I made the best of it.
And you served in the two wars?
Yes, sir, both in Korea and in Vietnam.
And your job was chaplain?
Yes, during the Vietnamese War, I served as a chaplain.
Did you see combat?
Yes, sir, I was in
All right.
3 different combat units. I was in a combat unit in Korea, and I was in a combat unit in Vietnam, 2 combat units.
What do you remember about say, Korea?
Well, I think most soldiers remember the weather probably more than anything, because in combat units you're outside, and in Korea it was awfully cold, and in Vietnam it was awfully hot.
That's what I've heard that, yeah.
So mostly the weather, but the camaraderie of your fellow soldiers and airmen is just fantastic.
All right, were you awarded any medals or?
Yes, sir, I received the Bronze Star and the Joint Service Commendation Medal. I received it in the Air Force, and then I received it in the Army. And because I'd received it in 2 different branches of the U.S. military, they issued me a Joint Service Commendation ribbon. Then, back in the United States, I served with a unit where I was awarded the Meritorious Service Medal.
Yeah. Did you stay in touch with their family and friends while you were there?
Oh, yes, sir.
What kind of mail did you have?
We would go periods 2 weeks and not get a letter, and I'd come back to my bunk after a day's work and find I had 7 or 8 letters laying on my bunk.
I just wondered if you had V-mail and that kind of thing.
It was free.
Okay.
Free air mail.
Good deal.
All we had to do was write up in the corner, free mail, and we knew it went by air to our loved ones.
Fine. That's good. What's your most memorable experience? Memorable, I should have said.
Well, I had several. Of course, the people. I got very close to many of the people in my unit. And I've stayed in touch with many of those people now for the 20 years since I was discharged in the Army. I've stayed in touch with many of the people. I guess seeing the heroic actions of many of the soldiers in combat, people who were willing to die for the other people in the unit to save the lives of the people around them.
I believe, I know, I heard you say that you had baptized several of the men there.
Yes, both in Vietnam as well as stateside on the military bases, we had several baptismal services.
That's good, yeah. What about the food and that you had over there? Your supplies and so forth?
Well, I sure wasn't born with a silver spoon in my mouth, so I enjoyed eating anything.
All right.
And the food was adequate. There are not many soldiers who don't complain about the mess hall and the mess hall food, but I found the food to be very adequate. And even though we worked hard, I gained weight on it, so it wasn't all bad. And supplies were adequate too. It wasn't always the availability of something you needed, but there were enough men in the units that they could always come up with substitutes for anything we needed. It'd be somewhere.
Do you remember anything especially that was humorous or unusual events?
Well, I guess the thing that touched me the most, there was always someone in the unit who was humorous and able to keep your mind light and keep the situation from getting too heavy. Even in the midst of combat, there were always troops who could make you laugh, and they were always cracking jokes even when the bullets were flying. They could keep you from getting too intensely involved in the combat.
All right. One thing is, how long were you in the service, and what was your rank when you were discharged?
I was in for 24 years, and I was discharged as a lieutenant colonel.
All right. Do you remember where you were when your service ended?
Yes, sir. I was at Fort Sill, Oklahoma.
Okay.
I had been there for 5 years.
All right. What did you do after the war ended, or after you were discharged?
I came back home, and my family and I bought a home here in Burleson. And I taught school for 3 years in the Joshua Independent School District, and was then offered to pastor a Methodist church in this area at Silver Creek, and I accepted that position. Then I came to a Methodist church here in Burleson, and I pastored between the two churches 8 years passed while I was pastoring them.
Do you keep in touch with anybody that you were in the service?
Oh, yes, sir. I hear regularly from some of them.
Good. Do you belong to any veterans organizations?
Yes, sir. I belong to the Retired Chaplains Association in the Metroplex chapter of the Retired Chaplains.
Have you attended any reunions with your old Army outfit?
Yes, sir, twice.
How did the time in service affect your life?
Oh, it's made me a much better person, because you see the depth of dedication and commitment and determination, and I couldn't help but be touched by that. But working as a chaplain, I was working with chaplains of every denomination under the sun, and therefore I have learned a greater appreciation for the church, the general church. And then, of course, having served my own denomination, the United Methodist Church, for many, many years, I think I'm a better minister for the time I put in the military.
Very good. Is there anything else that you'd like to add?
No, sir. I have a display presently on display in our United Methodist Church here in Burleson, and I understand Mr. Arnold is going to film some of that as a part of this tape presentation. And in that display, I have my field chaplain's kit that is issued to all Army chaplains, and it's to be set up on the hood of a Jeep. And you pull into an area, and in 15 minutes you can be set up for a worship service to serve Holy Communion to as many soldiers as you anticipate will come. And also in that display is a chaplain's stole that was issued to all U.S. Army chaplains. Because we came from different denominations, our vestments and stoles would look different. So the Army didn't want us to play up denominationalism, so they issued everyone a black stole with a golden cross, and it is a part of this display. And also on display is a vest pocket New Testament that was issued to all U.S. Army personnel. When they were inducted into the military service, they were issued a vest pocket New Testament, and they were asked to carry that with them wherever they went, because it was conveniently small enough that it fit into their shirt pocket. And we've heard examples over the years of how occasionally, particularly in World War II, a bullet would strike the individual, but would strike them where that New Testament was over their heart, and the bullet wouldn't penetrate the pages of the New Testament, so it saves some lives. So one of those is on display.
Good deal.
There.
All right.
Well, I appreciate this opportunity, and God bless America, and God bless anyone who sees it.
We appreciate your service to your country, and thank you very much for granting this interview. There's a field chaplain kit that Brother Worley was talking about. It's set that up on the hood of a Jeep, serve communion to the soldiers out in the field. This is a photo of Brother Worley back in his early service days. This is the black chaplain's stole that the chaplains were issued back in the Korean and Vietnamese wartime. This one was issued to Brother Worley. There's Brother Worley's ribbons for service in Korea and Vietnam. There's the New Testament that they issue to carry in your pocket, shirt pocket. There's his Lieutenant Colonel's leaves. There's his chaplain's cross. There's a songbook, Meeting God in Scripture. The New Testament that Joe Worley carried in his shirt pocket during his service in Vietnam and Iraq. Brother Worley, as an afterthought, just wonder, how did you conduct worship services under combat conditions?
Well, they vary a little differently than having a worship service in a sanctuary where everyone is comfortable. Most of the combat services, when we'd find that there was a lull in the fighting in a particular area, the Catholic priest and I would travel together. And depending on the size of the people who were available to a worship service, sometimes it would just be a squad of a few men. Sometimes it would be a platoon, and oftentimes a company would be pulled out of the combat line, and we could have a worship service for the entire company. We would gather them in a circle if it was nighttime, and many of the combat field worship services were held at night. We would have the vehicles of the unit, either the armored personnel carriers or the jeeps, or however the unit was traveling, come into a circle and turn on the headlights to shine light into the circle. Each chaplain was issued a field chaplain's kit that could be set up on the hood of a jeep. And each chaplain was issued 100 hymn books of 180 hymn books or hymns from out of the traditional hymnals of the different churches. Chaplains, of course, were representing, a Protestant chaplain represented almost all of the Christian denominations. So in any worship service, we would have people from all of the mainline Christian denominations. The Catholic priest would set up in one area, normally within that circle of lights, and I would set up in the opposite end of that circle of lights, or in the area where the troops were. We would hand out the hymn books. I would read a passage of scripture, and if it was possible, we would sing a hymn. The Army issued each chaplain a battery-powered recorder, tape recorder, so we could play the music from the hymns that had been pre-selected. But if there was danger to the troops, and in combat situations, you always have to be aware that the enemy is not too far away. Sometimes we wouldn't sing hymns because the music would carry. But if it was possible, we would sing a hymn. I'd read a passage of scripture. I'd do a devotional on that passage of scripture, not ever more than 8 to 10 minutes. We would serve Holy Communion. We would sing another hymn, and we'd dismiss the troops. Holy Communion is probably the most common worship service among the Christian churches. So I served Holy Communion every time I met with the field troops, every time we had a worship service. And there were a couple of reasons for that. Oftentimes, that might be the last worship service those troops had a chance to participate in, because many of them would go back into the field and be killed or injured and could not remain with us. Secondly, there would be liturgical Christians represented in the group that did observe Holy Communion every time they had a worship service. So being a United Methodist minister, I would serve Holy Communion each time we came together. Holy Communion is a sacrament in the Christian church, commemorating the death of Jesus Christ on the cross of Calvary. The elements used in most Holy Communion services is bread of some kind, and we always had crackers that came in the sea ration boxes. So I would crumble the crackers up in a plate. I would serve either wine or grape juice for one of the elements of Holy Communion. But as I think most people know, wine and grape juice don't keep in hot countries. Once you open the bottle, it will ruin in just a matter of a day or two. So I wrote to my wife and asked her to send me a case of grape Kool-Aid. So I would simply mix the powder with water and serve that as Holy Communion, because that would always keep, and I'd always have it available to me. I found that this was very meaningful to the troops. And if the Catholic priests couldn't accompany me, the Catholic soldiers would come to the service too. You may have heard the statement that there are no atheists in foxholes. I don't know if that's true or not, folks, but let me tell you, if the bullets are flying, people want to worship the Lord. So the Catholic troops would come and worship with us and observe Holy Communion with us. And I'm sure those times I couldn't go, the Catholic priest would set up Mass, and I'm sure the Protestants would attend his Mass equally as well. That's basically what we would do. And then back in the home base areas, we would have just a traditional worship service. But the field services were always a lot quicker, and we tried not to accumulate large groups of soldiers, because when the enemy is present, that's certainly a detriment to their life and a threat to their safety. So we would do it in small groups, and I would do field services sometimes 6 or 8 in a day, just moving from small unit to small unit, so we wouldn't have to accumulate a lot of soldiers in the same area. Does that kind of answer your question, Mr. Arnold?
Yes, sir, it does.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
Anything else you think of?
No, sir. It was
Very
a
well.
joy to be a part of worshiping with soldiers in combat situations.
I can imagine. All right, thank you very much. And it sounds like you did a fantastic job. And thank you very much, and may God bless you.
Thank you, sir.